just look at non-Trump data and then let's connect it together. How is it that President Trump did better than any Republican with blacks and Hispanics since 1960? He won West Texas. He won the Rio Grande Valley that a Republican has not won since 1906. President Trump won Beverly Hills. President Trump did unbelievably well in areas that Republicans have never ever done well. Republicans won 28 out of 28 House seats. Republicans were supposed to lose up and down California. Michelle Steele and Young Kim have won in Orange County. Mike Garcia is knocking on the door. It's within 50 to 100 votes, but he actually might pull it out. And polling said there was no way that he was going to be able to survive that. Republicans flipped a deeply Democrat seat in downtown Miami with Elvira Salazar, who speaks fluent Spanish, former communist refugee. So she was in Cuban communism and fled. An incredible story, and she won by 3 points. Trump did 17 points better in Miami-Dade County. And so Trump did better, 5 points better in Chicago, 1 point better in Washington, D.C. He did better everywhere, except the 4 cities that stopped counting on election night. And so before I proceed any further, let's just look at this completely rationally and logically, outside of all the filters of what you see on television, because they're all lying to you, okay? And I don't say that lightly. You're being lied to. Looking at this very rationally, and some of you might say there's no widespread evidence, there's no evidence widespread of voter fraud. Okay, let's just put that aside, and then how can anyone possibly say in any sort of human exercise where there's 170 million participants, and the prize is a $4 trillion government for 4 years, control of the U.S. Armed Forces, the intelligence agencies, and ultimate power, that we're supposed to believe that no one's going to cheat in that exercise when 170 million people are participating? People cheat playing Monopoly, okay? People cheat at poker. People cheat on taxes. People cheat driving to church. I'm sure one of you cheated by running a red light or disobeying a stop sign, or a U-turn you weren't supposed to do. We are programmed to make things better in our image. That's called sin, distance from God. And so we're supposed to believe that we have evidence of a multi-trillion-dollar money laundering industry that exists in our country, child sex trafficking industry, of a drug trafficking industry. We know organized crime hits every portion of America, everything. We have millions of prisoners. We could go on endlessly of the types of problems we have, but the one thing that operates perfectly and seamlessly with no corruption, no questions, is our voting system. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So, that's just looking at it logically and rationally. They say there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. So first of all, that's an objective and a subjective term, right? So it's kind of linguistic jiu-jitsu they're playing with you. How do you define widespread? Do you ever think about that? It's a completely subjective term, right? So one person might say widespread is 1%. Some person might say widespread is 5%. 1% Trump's president. So they say it's not widespread. Well, okay, 1% wouldn't be widespread. It's enough to determine the presidency. Do you see all of a sudden they're playing games and they're lying to you? And they say there's no evidence. Okay, if all of us went into the Sacramento area to restaurants and to laundromats the next couple days, you wouldn't see any evidence of money laundering until you were able to get the FBI or authorities involved, look through people's bank statements, see who's coming in with piles of cash, and all of a sudden you'd see who's trying to clean dollar bills in your local area. What's the point? Some of the stuff hides itself really well. That's what organized crime does. And you don't have massive amount of criminal units looking into it, they're going to keep on doing it. And so when you start to see these massive national trends and 4 outliers that happen to be the most 4 deciding counties and cities in the states that matter, then we have to call time out and ask really what's happening. And so we've been looking into this. We've been doing more research on our program and our podcast than almost any out there. So I'm just going to give you some numbers. I want everyone to think about this. Thank you. I want you to think about this really rationally, right? And so, by the way, we know what they are willing to do. And I want to be very clear. And I say this with no kidding whatsoever. If I thought Benito Mussolini was in the White House, I would cheat. And I would be able to justify it under a Christian ethic. I would. If I thought that Adolf Hitler was in the White House, I would cheat in the election. I would. Because that's what they've convinced themselves of. They have convinced themselves that that is actually a reincarnation of 1930s Germany. It's a sick lie. But there are 30 million people that believe that. So think what they would be willing to do, what you would be willing to do if you were counting votes in 1930s Germany. What would you do? You'd probably throw away some votes for that one party, wouldn't you? Because you would know, you would think that you would know. That's actually the pathological obsession that these people have. And so all of a sudden this idea of fraud becomes a lot more palatable. Like, wow, okay. So here's one example that I can use, and I can go endlessly with this. Explain to me, anyone in the media, please offer me an explanation. Why in Pennsylvania there was a 1,774% increase of voter registration for 90-plus-year-olds in the midst of a pandemic within 90 days? No, that's a really simple, easy question, right? Why is it that there was a bum rush of 90-plus-year-olds in the midst of a pandemic, the likes of which we've never seen, to go register to vote? Why is it most of those lived in places where other voters are registered to vote? Those are mostly nursing homes or living centers. Well, an easy answer would be a practice that has been exposed before by certain agencies when a little bit of investigation is done. It's called granny farming. It's a term that the New York Times came up with, which is the intercepting and filling out of ballots of people that are at risk and they actually don't receive the ballots themselves. Just 2 days ago, a woman named Susan at a developmentally disabled clinic in downtown Milwaukee said she started to do Zoom interviews with all of her patients because of the virus. She's not able to go in. 20 of them said that they wanted to vote for Trump, but the person who came in filled out the ballot for them for Biden and they were able to do nothing. Can you think of anything more sick or evil than going to developmentally disabled patients and then exerting your political will against their choice? That is an evil that I don't even want to touch right now. But again, if they think the person in office is an evil person, they're justifying their own behavior. And so there's an infinite amount of data I could go with this stuff. So it's Dane County, Wisconsin. Let's just use this. Anyone know Dane County, Wisconsin? Maybe, maybe not. No. Okay, so Dane County, Wisconsin is where the University of Wisconsin-Madison is. Okay, it's the largest school in the state of Wisconsin. When Barack Obama visited in 2012, he had 45,000 people. I think we'll all agree that Obama, for all of his flaws, that was a real political movement. People supported him, they had signage, they had enthusiasm, they had energy. There was a kinetic energy to Barack Obama, right? People were talking about it. It was kitchen table conversation. There was a real velocity behind the Obama movement, right? Not one that I would philosophically subscribe to, but I believed it when he won. Like, I bought it. I said, okay, there's support here. It is inexplicable to me that Joe Biden, while the campus of University of Wisconsin-Madison is closed, it's a ghost town, managed to get 65,000 more votes than Barack Obama did in that same county. I don't believe it. And I want someone to prove how that's possible. Joe Biden, who said he had no ground game, no canvassers whatsoever. Now, the only explanation is because of vote by mail. Is vote by mail because everyone got a ballot, all of a sudden expanded turnout, and therefore it expanded Joe Biden's reach. Jimmy Carter himself said that vote by mail is the most unsecure, open to fraud method of voting. Of course it is. You don't know who's actually filling out that ballot. And you guys know all too well ballot harvesting here in the state of California, what it can do to an election. And even with ballot harvesting, you guys did unbelievably well in some of these elections here in California. And so the suppression of anyone that mentions this stuff is also a tell that we're onto something. How aggressive they are coming after me for just asking questions shows me that there's something to this. Whether it be in Dominion voting systems, or Hammer and Scorecard, or in Smartmatic, or whatever it is, there are open-ended questions that we deserve answers to. Because here's the consequence. The consequence is that if they do what they typically do, which is sit down and shut up, you're a racist, he's going to be president, then 70 million people are no longer going to trust the system. And while that might be something that could benefit us politically in the short term, it's a really bad thing for the country. It just is. And so what happened in my working theory is this, and this is my exclusive theory, is that on Saturday before the election, the Biden campaign and the Democrats had to resort to Plan B and Plan C. Their initial plan was to win in a legitimate blue wave landslide styled after Obama in 2008 and 2012, where they would win Senate races in Montana, Iowa. They would have that any fraud that was done would be covered up by a massive Nancy Pelosi expansion. But the Saturday before the election, they started to see what I saw, which was the Democrat polling was collapsing faster than the Maginot Line in World War II. I mean, it was the French way that just surrendered, right? It was collapsing in real time. And it was happening so quickly because a lot of you know this in your life, you know people, the late breakers all went for Trump. Married women went for Trump in a way the polling would never have expected. 6 points above the polling, right? Where all of a sudden, decent Americans were like, I don't like his style, but he's far better than Biden. And it was happening, and the Democrats didn't know what to do. And it's my working theory, and I think I can prove it. I don't know if I'd be able to prove it in front of a judge because it's just that threshold of evidence is, I don't have subpoena power, right? But I could prove it to all of you, is that they went to Plan B, which is the Chicagoization of American politics, which is we are not going to submit our election results on election night. We are going to take days, we are going to sort, we are going to cut corners, and all of a sudden we're going to slow down the process. Have you ever lived through an election where it takes them 5 days to count ballots? Where all of a sudden it's this all-week Banana Republic style affair of just like these slow trickle of ballots? And the reason I believe is this, is that if all the ballots were demanded to be counted on election night, I think President Trump would have won. I really do. And so, this is an old Chicago tactic, right? Just figure out how many votes you need and compensate the difference with all the ballot laundering and the absentee rejection fraud. And so here's a really simple example, a numerical example. Just think about this logically. Just strip yourself of any bias you have for Trump or whatever. Georgia had 260,000 mail-in ballots in 2016. They had 1.3 million this election cycle. What guarantees were we given that they were prepared to process 1.3 million ballots correctly and verify all those signatures and check for fraud? In 2016, 4% of all mail-in ballots were rejected for many different reasons. Less than half of 1% was rejected this election in Georgia because they weren't prepared for that kind of onslaught of mail-in ballots. And so that opens up for people that are filling in two ballots. They're out of state. They're filling it in for friends. And you might say, well, it's not widespread. 1% of 1.3 million is a very big number. In fact, that's close to the number it would take. 4% of that number is about 40,000. That would be enough for President Donald Trump to now be considered the winner in Georgia. And so I know that I'm going on about this, but I think you guys are very interested in this, that this was, without a doubt, not their primary plan. And I think that if we can finally get the Federal Bureau of Investigation or the Department of Justice involved, which I don't know where they are, and I'm not trying to make you upset, but just think about this for a second. Bubba Wallace, the NASCAR driver, claims that his rope on his garage is a noose. Okay. Again, it wasn't as bad as Jussie Smollett. He didn't plan it there, but he gives this whole diatribe about how it's a noose, and he knows a noose when he sees one, and only a black person can know what a noose looks like, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, everyone knows what a noose looks like, and we know what a garage thing is, okay? The FBI sent 13 agents to go investigate that overnight. Remember? 13 agents, like instantaneously. And they determined that it was a garage rope and it wasn't a noose, and all of that was just kind of drum up controversy. Where are the FBI agents flooding these urban areas and just asking questions? Where are they? It's as if there's this